The dust-laden winds of Wyoming Territory whipped at Dinah Vale's skirts as she stumbled across the barren plains, her knuckles white around the handle of a battered leather suitcase. Blood trickled from her split lip, and her left eye was swelling shut gifts from her now former employer who had demanded payment of a different kind when she announced her departure. The year was 1878, and for a woman alone, the West offered precious few options. Behind her lay the mining town of Silver Creek, a place that had promised opportunity but delivered only misery. Ahead lay nothing but uncertainty and the fading light of a ruthless sun. The suitcase wasn't heavy. It contained little more than rags, a tattered copy of Jane Eyre, and a faded daguerreotype of parents long dead from cholera. Still, it was all she had in the world. Her 22 years of life had taught her that something was better than nothing, and even rags could be sewn into something useful. Dinah had been walking for hours, hoping to reach the next town before nightfall, but the vastness of the Wyoming landscape had deceived her. Distances that looked manageable stretched into endless miles of sagebrush and stone. Her worn boots, the only pair she owned, had rubbed blisters on her heels, and her parched throat burned with each labored breath. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her heart seize. In these parts, riders could mean salvation or doom. Clutching the suitcase tighter, she quickened her pace, though she knew outrunning a horse was impossible. "Whoa there," a deep voice called out as a magnificent chestnut stallion trotted alongside her. The rider pulled back on the reins, slowing his mount to match her desperate stride. "Madam, you're a long way from anywhere." Dinah didn't slow, didn't look up. Men with kind voices often harbored unkind intentions. "Madam, there's nothing but 20 miles of nothing ahead. You'll not make it before dark, and the wolves get mighty curious once the sun sets." At this, she paused, breathing hard, and chanced a glance upward. The man atop the horse wore a wide-brimmed hat that cast shadows across features that were handsome but weathered by sun and wind. His clothes were dusty but of good quality, a white shirt beneath a leather vest, denims and boots that had seen many miles. A gun belt hung at his hip, but it was the kindness in his blue eyes that made her hesitate rather than flee. "I'm fine, sir," she managed, voice cracking from thirst. "Just passing through." The man dismounted with the fluid grace of someone born to the saddle. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and moved with the casual confidence of a man accustomed to the harsh realities of frontier life. "Name's Jackson Vance," he said, keeping a respectful distance. "I run the Double V Ranch about 5 miles east of here." He gestured toward the horizon. "Whatever you're running from, it can't be worth dying of exposure. There's a storm brewing." He nodded toward the darkening sky where thunderheads were gathering. Dinah tightened her grip on the suitcase. "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Vance, but the first drops of rain began to fall, heavy and cold, instantly soaking through her thin shawl. The wind picked up, howling across the plains with a vengeance that threatened to knock her off her feet." Jackson Vance stepped closer, concern etching lines around his eyes. "Let me help you, Miss Vale," she supplied reluctantly. "Dinah Vale, Miss Vale," he acknowledged with a slight tip of his hat. "You can't outrun this storm. My ranch isn't far. I offer you shelter, a meal, and safe passage to wherever you're headed come morning." His gaze fell to the suitcase she clutched so desperately. "She tried to run with a suitcase of rags," he murmured, almost to himself, then louder, "Leave that, I'll give you all you need." Thunder cracked overhead, making Dinah jump. Rain was now falling in sheets, turning the ground beneath her feet to mud that sucked at her boots. "I don't take charity," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. Jackson's expression softened. "It's not charity, Miss Vale, it's common decency. Out here, refusing help isn't brave, it's foolish." Another crack of thunder, closer this time. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the desolate landscape and the impossible distance she still had to travel. "My housekeeper, Mrs. Abernathy, is at the ranch," Jackson added, sensing her hesitation. "You'll not be alone with me. You have my word as a gentleman." Dinah weighed her options, which were pitifully few: death by exposure or trusting this stranger. The choice, when framed that way, wasn't really a choice at all. "Very well, Mr. Vance," she conceded, her shoulders sagging with a mixture of relief and trepidation. "But I keep my suitcase." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "As you wish." He extended a hand toward his horse. "This is Thunder. He's sturdy enough to carry us both." With surprising gentleness, Jackson helped Dinah mount, then swung up behind her. The warmth of his chest against her back was both alarming and comforting. He reached around her to grasp the reins, creating a protective circle with his arms. "Hold tight to that suitcase if you must," he said, his breath warm against her ear. "But know that some things are worth leaving behind." As Thunder began to trot across the prairie, Dinah clutched her precious bundle. She had left many things behind in her 22 years' homes, hopes, dreams. But she wasn't ready to abandon the last tangible pieces of her history, meager though they were. The rain continued its assault as they rode, but ensconced in Jackson Vance's protective embrace, Dinah felt something she hadn't experienced in a very long time: the tentative stirrings of safety. The Double V Ranch materialized out of the storm like a mirage, a substantial two-story house with a wide porch, flanked by a barn and various outbuildings. Lights glowed warmly in the windows, a beacon in the gathering darkness. As they approached, a figure appeared at the door, a plump woman with gray hair tucked neatly beneath a cap, wiping her hands on an apron. "Jackson Vance, what in tarnation are you doing out in this weather?" the woman called, then paused as she noticed Dinah. "And who might this be?" Jackson dismounted in one fluid motion, then reached up to help Dinah down. "Mrs. Abernathy, this is Miss Dinah Vale. She'll be our guest tonight. Miss Vale, Mrs. Abernathy, the finest housekeeper in all of Wyoming Territory. Mrs. Abernathy's sharp eyes took in Dinah's bedraggled appearance, lingering momentarily on her bruised face, but she said nothing about it. Instead, she ushered them both inside. "Well, don't just stand there getting soaked. Come in, come in. I've got stew on the stove and bread in the oven." The interior of the house was surprisingly refined for a ranch so far from civilization. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall of the main room, with comfortable-looking furniture arranged around it. Bookshelves lined another wall, filled with volumes that made Dinah's single book seem even more pitiful. "Mrs. Abernathy will show you to a room where you can get dried off," Jackson said, removing his hat and running a hand through damp hair that curled slightly at the ends. "We'll eat when you're ready." Dinah followed the housekeeper up a wide staircase to a bedroom that was larger than any she had ever occupied. A four-poster bed with a handmade quilt stood against one wall, and a washstand with a porcelain basin occupied another. A wardrobe of polished oak completed the furnishings. "I'll bring up some hot water for washing," Mrs. Abernathy said, her tone kind but practical. "And I'll find you something dry to wear. You look to be about the size of Mr. Vance's sister when she visits." "That's very kind, but I have my own clothes," Dinah said, lifting the suitcase slightly. Mrs. Abernathy's eyes softened. "Of course you do, dear, but they're likely as wet as what you're wearing. No sense catching your death of cold when we have perfectly good dry clothes here." When the older woman left, Dinah sank onto the edge of the bed, still clutching her suitcase. The room swam before her eyes as exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. She hadn't slept properly in days, too afraid of her employer's increasingly aggressive advances. True to her word, Mrs. Abernathy returned with hot water and a simple but well-made blue dress. "This should fit well enough for dinner. We can see about your own things tomorrow." Left alone again, Dinah finally set down her suitcase and peeled off her wet clothes. The hot water was heavenly against her skin, washing away not just the dust of the road but some of the fear that had been her constant companion. The dress fit reasonably well, though it was a bit loose in the waist. Dinah had never owned anything so fine the fabric was soft, the stitching precise. For a moment, she allowed herself to enjoy the feeling of being clean and properly dressed. A soft knock at the door startled her from her reverie. "Dinner's ready whenever you are, Miss Vale," Mrs. Abernathy called. Dinah took a deep breath and opened the door. The smell of fresh bread and savory stew guided her back downstairs, where she found Jackson Vance standing by the fireplace, also cleaned up and changed into dry clothes. He turned as she entered, and something in his expression made her heart skip a beat. "Miss Vale," he said, a note of appreciation in his voice. "You look much refreshed." "Thank you for your hospitality, Mr. Vance," she replied formally, acutely aware of how different their stations in life were. He was clearly a successful rancher, while she was little more than a fugitive from a life of servitude. "Please call me Jackson. Out here, formality seems rather pointless when we're all just trying to survive." Mrs. Abernathy bustled in from the kitchen. "Sit, sit. Food's getting cold." The dining table was set with china and silver that would have been at home in an Eastern mansion. Dinah sat gingerly, afraid of breaking something valuable. As they ate, Jackson kept the conversation light, asking nothing about her past or why she had been walking alone across the prairie. Instead, he spoke of his ranch, the challenges of the recent dry spell, and his hopes for the upcoming cattle drive. "How long have you had this ranch?" Dinah asked, genuinely curious. Everything about the place spoke of prosperity, yet they were miles from any town. "Going on 8 years now," Jackson replied. "Came out from Virginia after the war with not much more than the clothes on my back and a dream of open skies." He glanced around the room. "It was just a one-room cabin then, built it up little by little." "You've accomplished a great deal," Dinah said, impressed despite herself. A shadow crossed Jackson's face. "Not without cost. Lost my first wife, Caroline, to fever our second year here. After that, it was just me and the land for a long while." "I'm sorry for your loss," Dinah said softly. He nodded acknowledgement. "Life out here takes as much as it gives. You have to be willing to start over, sometimes more than once." The words hung in the air between them, and Dinah wondered if he had somehow divined her own story, one of repeated fresh starts, each one harder than the last. After dinner, Mrs. Abernathy shooed them into the sitting room while she cleared away the dishes. Jackson poured 2 small glasses of amber liquid from a crystal decanter. "For medicinal purposes," he said with a slight smile, offering one to Dinah. "Helps with the aches of a long day." She accepted it cautiously, taking only the smallest sip. The whiskey burned a path down her throat, but the warmth that followed was not unpleasant. "Tomorrow I'll have one of my hands drive you to Riverton," Jackson said, settling into an armchair across from her. "It's the nearest town of any size. You'll find the stagecoach there can take you wherever you're headed." Dinah stared into her glass. "That's very kind. May I ask where you're bound?" When she hesitated, he added, not to pry, but to ensure you get there safely. "I don't exactly know," she admitted. "Away, somewhere new, somewhere I can find honest work." Jackson studied her over the rim of his glass, running from something or toward something. "Both, perhaps." She met his gaze steadily. "Isn't that why most people come west?" He chuckled, a warm sound that seemed to fill the room. "Fair point, Miss Vale, fair point indeed." The grandfather clock in the corner chimed 9, and Dinah realized how exhausted she was. "I should retire. It's been a long day, of course." Jackson rose when she did, the gesture of a gentleman. "Sleep well, Miss Vale. You're safe here." Those 4 words, "you're safe here," followed Dinah up the stairs and into her dreams, where for once no shadows pursued her. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through curtains Dinah had been too tired to close the night before. For a moment, she lay disoriented, the comfort of the bed and the unfamiliar surroundings confusing her sleep-addled mind. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back her desperate flight, the storm, the cowboy who had offered sanctuary. A soft knock at the door preceded Mrs. Abernathy's cheerful voice. "Breakfast in 20 minutes, Miss Vale. I've laid out fresh towels for washing up." "Thank you," Dinah called back, stretching muscles stiff from unaccustomed walking. She rose and padded to the window, gazing out at the Double V Ranch in daylight. The property stretched as far as she could see, lush pastures dotted with cattle, outbuildings in good repair, a corral where several horses grazed. It was a kingdom unto itself, carved from wilderness by one man's vision and hard work. After washing, Dinah donned her own dress, now clean and pressed courtesy of Mrs. Abernathy. The housekeeper had even mended a tear in the sleeve that Dinah hadn't had time to fix in her hasty departure from Silver Creek. Downstairs, she found Jackson at the table, reading a newspaper. He stood when she entered, that same appreciative look warming his eyes. "Good morning, Miss Vale. I trust you slept well." "Better than I have in months," she admitted. "Your home is very comfortable." Mrs. Abernathy appeared with a platter of flapjacks, bacon, and eggs. "Eat up, both of you." "Got a feeling it's going to be a busy day." As they ate, Jackson outlined his plan. "I've asked my foreman, Frank, to ready the wagon. He'll take you to Riverton after breakfast. Should arrive by midday, giving you plenty of time to arrange onward travel." Dinah nodded, a pang of something like disappointment surprising her. Of course she couldn't stay. This brief respite was just that, brief. "You've been more than kind, Mr. Vance." "Jackson," he reminded her gently. "Jackson," she echoed, the name feeling oddly intimate on her lips. He hesitated, then asked, "Would it be presumptuous to ask what drove you to be walking alone across open country with nothing but a suitcase?" Dinah set down her fork, appetite suddenly diminished. "I was employed as a housekeeper in Silver Creek," she began, choosing her words carefully. The arrangement became untenable. Jackson's jaw tightened, his gaze flicking to her still visible bruises. "I see. I left rather abruptly," she continued, "with little planning, and your family, is there no one expecting you?" Dinah shook her head. "My parents died when I was 16. I've been on my own since then." A heavy silence fell, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock. Finally, Jackson cleared his throat. "Miss Vale, Dinah, I find myself in need of a schoolteacher." She blinked, caught off guard by the change in subject. "A schoolteacher?" "Yes." "There are several families working on the ranch with children of various ages. Currently, they have to ride 10 miles to the nearest school, which is impossible in winter. I've been meaning to establish a proper school here on the property." He leaned forward, eyes intent. "You're educated." "That much is clear from your speech and manner. Have you ever taught?" Yes, briefly, in St. Louis before coming west." It had been one of her happier employments, ended only when the school closed due to lack of funds. "Then I'm offering you a position. Room and board here at the main house, plus a monthly salary." He named a sum that made her eyes widen. "The building is already there, a small cabin we've been using for storage. It would need to be converted, of course." Dinah stared at him, mind racing. Was this real, or some kind of trick? "Why would you offer this to a stranger?" Jackson's expression was open, honest. "Because I believe in second chances, Dinah, and because I've seen the hunger for learning in the children here with no way to satisfy it. They deserve better." Mrs. Abernathy, who had been quietly clearing dishes, spoke up. "It's a fine idea. These youngsters need proper schooling, not just what their mamas can manage between chores." Dinah looked from one face to the other, searching for deceit and finding none. "I would need books, supplies." "I'll provide everything," Jackson said promptly. "We can send to Denver for whatever you require." "And my duties would be solely teaching? Nothing else?" She had to be certain. A flash of anger crossed Jackson's face, quickly controlled. "You would be the school teacher of the Double V Ranch, respected and valued for your skills. Nothing more would be expected or accepted." Dinah thought of the alternative, arriving in Riverton with almost no money, no references, and no prospects. The stagecoach would take her somewhere, but what awaited her there? More of the same, most likely. More men like her former employer, more desperate choices. "I accept," she said, the words tumbling out before doubt could silence them. "Thank you for this opportunity." The smile that lit Jackson's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Excellent. We'll start preparing the schoolhouse today. In the meantime, you're welcome to stay here and rest." Rest was the last thing on Dinah's mind. "I'd like to help if I may." See the building, start planning how to arrange it. Of course. Jackson rose from the table. I'll have thunder saddled for you. Oh, I couldn't possibly. Nonsense, he interrupted gently. Every teacher at the Double V should know how to ride. Consider it your first lesson in ranch life. An hour later, Dinah found herself atop the massive chestnut stallion, with Jackson walking beside, leading the horse toward a small cabin set apart from the other buildings. The day was clear and bright, the storm of the previous night having washed the world clean. Workers paused in their tasks to tip their hats as they passed, curious glances following the newcomer. That's Frank, my foreman, Jackson said, nodding toward a weathered man directing hands at the corral. And over there are the Millers, Sarah and John. They have 3 children who will be in your school. Dinah tried to absorb everything, mentally cataloging names and faces. The ranch was like a small village with perhaps 15 families in total, according to Jackson. Here we are, he announced as they reached the cabin. It was sturdy but simple, with a pitched roof and a small porch. Built it as a bunkhouse originally, but we've since constructed larger quarters for the hands. Inside, the space was filled with crates and tools, but Dinah could immediately see its potential. Large windows allowed ample light, and the single room was spacious enough to accommodate several rows of desks. It's perfect, she said, already envisioning how she would arrange the space. How many children will there be? 12, ranging from 6 to 16, Jackson replied, watching her with evident pleasure. Though more may come as word spreads, neighboring ranches might send their children as well. Dinah walked the perimeter of the room, mind racing with plans. We'll need desks, a blackboard, books. She turned to him, suddenly uncertain. You're truly serious about this? Jackson stepped closer, his expression earnest. Completely serious. Education is what separates us from savagery, Dinah. These children deserve the chance to learn, to dream beyond the boundaries of the ranch. The passion in his voice stirred something in her, a recognition of a kindred spirit who valued knowledge as she did. For the first time since arriving at the Double V, Dinah fully relaxed, believing that perhaps this opportunity was genuine. Then I'll do my best not to disappoint you, she promised. I have no doubt of that. His gaze held hers for a moment longer than necessary, and Dinah felt heat rise to her cheeks. The next week passed in a blur of activity. The cabin was emptied, cleaned, and transformed. Jackson sent riders to Riverton for supplies, returning with desks, slates, chalk, and books. Word spread quickly among the ranch families, and mothers began appearing at the main house, curious about the new schoolteacher. Sarah Miller, mother of 3, became Dinah's first friend among the ranch women. A practical, good-humored woman in her 30s, she brought fresh bread one afternoon as Dinah was arranging the new schoolhouse. Thought you might need sustenance, she said, setting the loaf on one of the desks. Men never think about such things when they're caught up in a project. Dinah smiled gratefully, suddenly aware of her hunger. Thank you, it smells wonderful. Sarah looked around approvingly. This is coming along nicely. My Ellen can hardly sleep for excitement. She's been begging for proper schooling for years. As they shared the bread, Sarah provided a wealth of information about the ranch and its owner. Jackson's built something special here, she said. When John and I arrived 5 years ago, we had nothing, lost our farm in Kansas to drought. Jackson gave John work and us a home. He does that, sees what people need and provides it if he can. He seems very generous, Dinah agreed, curious despite herself. Has he never remarried? After his wife died, I mean. Sarah's eyes twinkled knowingly. There have been interested parties for sure. Man with his looks and property? But no, he's kept to himself in that way. Some say he's still grieving Caroline, but others think he's just waiting for the right woman. She gave Dinah a pointed look. Someone who values more than his land and money. Dinah felt her cheeks warm again. I'm just the schoolteacher, Sarah. Of course you are, the older woman replied, not bothering to hide her smile. And I'm just saying that Jackson Vance doesn't bring home strays unless he sees something special in them. The conversation left Dinah thoughtful. She had noticed Jackson watching her when he thought she wasn't looking, had felt the electricity when their hands accidentally touched while arranging books on shelves. But she had dismissed it as her imagination, or worse, her own dangerous attraction to a man so far above her station. The school was set to open on Monday, and by Sunday evening, everything was ready. Dinah had prepared lessons for different age groups, arranged the desks in neat rows, and even hung a map of the United States on one wall. It was more than she had ever had in her brief teaching stint in St. Louis. That evening, Jackson invited her to ride with him to a ridge overlooking the ranch. "To give you perspective on your new home," he explained. They rode side by side, Dinah now comfortable enough on horseback to manage without assistance. The late summer evening was perfect warm with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of sage and distant rain. At the top of the ridge, they dismounted, and Jackson spread a blanket on the ground. From this vantage point, the double V spread out below them like a miniature kingdom: the main house, the barns, the corrals, the workers' cabins. And now the schoolhouse, its new coat of white paint gleaming in the setting sun. "It's beautiful," Dinah said softly, genuinely moved by the vista. "You've built something remarkable here." Jackson stood beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "I've been fortunate," he said. "But a man needs more than land and cattle to make a life worth living." She glanced up at him, caught by the intensity in his blue eyes. "What more do you need? Purpose? Community?" He paused, then added quietly, "Companionship." The word hung between them, laden with meaning. Dinah's heart hammered in her chest, and she looked away, back to the safety of the landscape. "The school will open tomorrow," she said, changing the subject. "I hope I don't disappoint the children or their parents." "You won't." Jackson's confidence in her was unwavering. "You were meant for this, Dinah. I knew it the moment I saw you struggling across the prairie, refusing to abandon even a suitcase of rags because they were yours." She tensed. "You looked in my suitcase?" "No," he said quickly, "but Mrs. Abernathy mentioned it when she was helping with your things. She meant no harm." Dinah sighed, embarrassment flooding her. "It's not all rags. There's a book, a favorite of my mother's, and a picture of my parents. Small things, but—" She trailed off, unable to articulate why these modest possessions meant so much. "But they're yours," Jackson finished for her. "Things no one can take from you. I understand that, Dinah. When I came west, all I had was my father's pocket watch and a letter from my mother. Everything else had been lost in the war." His understanding, so complete and unquestioning, broke something open inside her. Before she could stop herself, words were pouring out the story of her parents' deaths from cholera, her years in a St. Louis orphanage, the series of increasingly desperate situations that had brought her to Silver Creek, and the employer whose advances had turned violent when rejected. Jackson listened without interruption, his face darkening at parts but never showing pity, only compassion. When she finished, he took her hand gently in his. "Thank you for trusting me with your story," he said. "It only confirms what I already knew, that you're a woman of extraordinary courage and resilience." Dinah shook her head, uncomfortable with the praise. "I've just done what was necessary to survive, which is more than many would manage." Jackson's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand, sending shivers up her arm. "Dinah, I want you to know that you have a home here for as long as you wish it. The school, yes, but more than that. A place where you belong, where you're valued." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, and Dinah found herself believing that perhaps here, at last, she could put down roots without fear of being uprooted by circumstance or cruelty. "Thank you," she whispered, tears pricking at her eyes, "for everything." They sat in companionable silence as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. In that moment, with Jackson's hand warm around hers and the beauty of the land spread before them, Dinah allowed herself to hope not just for survival, but for happiness. The Double V Ranch School opened the next morning with all 12 children present, scrubbed clean and dressed in their best clothes. Parents lingered, curious to see this city woman who would be teaching their offspring. Jackson stood at the back of the room, a reassuring presence as Dinah called the class to order. "Good morning," she began, surprised at how steady her voice sounded despite her nerves. "My name is Miss Vale, and I'm delighted to be your teacher." The youngest children gazed at her with wide, curious eyes, while the older ones maintained a studied nonchalance that didn't quite hide their interest. Dinah moved confidently to the blackboard and wrote her name in large, clear letters. "Education is a gift," she continued, warming to her subject. "One that no one can ever take from you. In this room, we'll travel the world through books, solve mysteries through mathematics, and learn the story of our nation through history." As she spoke, she saw interest kindle in even the most reluctant faces. These children, raised on a remote ranch with limited exposure to the wider world, hungered for knowledge they didn't even know existed. The day passed in a blur of introductions, assessments, and basic lessons. By afternoon, Dinah had grouped the children by ability rather than age, recognizing that some of the younger ones were quite advanced while older ones had gaps in their education due to the demands of ranch life. When the final bell rang at 3 o'clock, the children gathered their slates and filed out, chattering excitedly about their new school. Several parents waited outside, and Dinah found herself surrounded by women eager to hear how their children had performed. "They're all wonderful," she assured Sarah Miller, whose daughter Ellen had shown a particular aptitude for reading. "Eager to learn and well-behaved." After the last family departed, Dinah sank into her chair, exhausted but exhilarated. Teaching was what she had been born to do. She felt it in her bones. Here, surrounded by eager minds and the tools to nourish them, she had found her purpose. A knock at the open door made her look up. Jackson stood there, hat in hand, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Congratulations, Miss Vale," he said formally. "By all accounts, your first day was a resounding success." Dinah returned his smile, too tired to hide her pleasure. "The children are a joy to teach, so curious, so hungry for knowledge." "Like someone else I know," Jackson said, crossing to her desk. "I remember a woman who wouldn't abandon even a suitcase of old clothes because they represented something important to her. You're never going to let me forget that, are you?" Dinah laughed, the sound surprising her. When had she last laughed freely? "Never," he confirmed, offering his hand to help her up. "Come, Mrs. Abernathy has prepared a special dinner to celebrate your first day, and I have something for you." Curious, Dinah allowed him to lead her back to the main house. True to his word, Mrs. Abernathy had outdone herself. The dining table was laden with roast chicken, potatoes, fresh bread, and an apple pie cooling on the sideboard. "A feast fit for the double Suitcase first schoolmarm," the housekeeper announced proudly. After dinner, Jackson disappeared briefly, returning with a small wrapped package which he placed before Dinah. A small token to commemorate the occasion. Carefully, she unwrapped it to find a beautiful leather-bound journal, its cover embossed with her initials, D.V. "I thought you might want to record your experiences," Jackson explained. "The beginnings of the school, your impressions of ranch life, whatever you wish." Dinah ran her fingers over the supple leather, deeply moved by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "It's beautiful, thank you." "Look inside," he urged. Opening the cover, she found an inscription in bold, flowing script. "To Dinah Vale, who brings light to the double V, may this be the first chapter of many. With admiration, Jackson Vance." The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. No one had ever given her such a personal gift or expressed such faith in her abilities. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. Jackson reached across the table to take her hand. "Say you'll stay, not just as our teacher but as part of our community. Part of." He hesitated, then continued more softly, "part of my life." The request hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility. Dinah looked into his eyes and saw something that both thrilled and terrified her: hope, desire, and the beginning of something deeper. "I would like that," she whispered, her heart racing. "Very much." The smile that lit his face was worth any risk. Mrs. Abernathy, witnessing the exchange, discreetly slipped from the room, leaving them alone with the crackling fire and the unspoken promise of a future neither had dared imagine just days before. As autumn settled over the Wyoming Territory, the Double V Ranch School flourished under Dinah's guidance. The children made rapid progress, their natural intelligence sharpened by her patient teaching. Word spread to neighboring ranches, and soon 3 more children joined the class, riding in each morning from properties 5 miles distant. Dinah found herself settling into ranch life with surprising ease. She learned to ride properly, to identify the different types of cattle Jackson raised, and even to bake bread under Mrs. Abernathy's tutelage. The nightmares that had plagued her since Silver Creek gradually faded, replaced by dreams of open skies and endless possibilities. And always, there was Jackson. He kept a respectful distance, mindful of her position and the gossip that might arise, but his attentions were unmistakable. Flowers appeared on her desk each Monday morning. Books he thought she might enjoy were left casually on the porch of the schoolhouse. On Sundays, he invited her to ride with him, showing her the furthest reaches of his property and sharing stories of how he had built the Double V from nothing. As October painted the landscape in gold and russet, Dinah realized with startling clarity that she was falling in love with Jackson Vance. It wasn't just gratitude for his rescue or admiration for his accomplishments. It was the way he listened when she spoke, valuing her opinions. The gentleness with which he treated everyone under his care. The passion with which he pursued his vision of creating not just a profitable ranch, but a community where people could thrive. One crisp afternoon, as they rode along a stream where cottonwoods shed their leaves like golden snow, Jackson reined in his horse and dismounted, helping Dinah down beside him. "I want to show you something," he said, leading her to a small clearing where a foundation of stone had been laid. "This is where I planned to build a home for Caroline and me before she fell ill. A place separate from the main house where we could start our family." Dinah walked the perimeter of the foundation, touched that he would share something so personal. "It's a beautiful location." "I've never shown anyone else this place," Jackson said quietly. "After Caroline died, I couldn't bear to continue building, but lately I've been thinking it might be time to start again." The implications of his words were clear and Dinah's heart raced. "Jackson." He moved closer, taking her hands in his. "Dinah, I know it's only been 2 months since you came into my life, but I feel as though I've been waiting for you all along. You're strong, kind, intelligent, everything I've ever wanted in a partner." "I'm just a school teacher," she protested weakly. "With nothing to my name but a suitcase of rags." Jackson's laugh was warm and genuine. "Do you really think I care about that? I started with nothing too, remember?" His expression grew serious. "What matters is who you are, Dinah, and who we could be together." Before she could respond, he leaned down and kissed her, a gentle pressure that quickly deepened as she responded. His arms encircled her, strong and secure, and Dinah felt as though she had finally, truly come home. When they broke apart, both breathless, Jackson rested his forehead against hers. "I'm falling in love with you, Dinah Vale. I don't expect an answer today, but I want you to know my intentions are honorable. When you're ready, I hope you'll consider becoming my wife." Dinah's mind whirled with the enormity of what he was offering, not just his heart, but a life beyond anything she had dared to dream. "I need time," she whispered. "You have it," he assured her, stepping back slightly but keeping hold of her hands. "All the time you need. Nothing has to change unless you want it to." But everything had already changed, and they both knew it. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, each lost in thought about the threshold they had just crossed. That night, alone in her room, Dinah opened the journal Jackson had given her and began to write about her fears, her hopes, and the unexpected love that had blossomed in the most unlikely of places. As her pen moved across the page, she realized that for the first time in her life, she was planning a future rather than just surviving the present. The next morning, a commotion in the ranch yard drew her to the window. A group of riders had arrived, and at their center was a figure that made her blood run cold. Harold Simmons, her former employer from Silver Creek. Panic seized her as she watched Jackson stride out to meet the group. What was Simmons doing here? How had he found her? Would Jackson believe whatever lies the man told? Hands shaking, Dinah dressed quickly and made her way downstairs, arriving at the front door just as Jackson's voice rose in anger. "I don't care what papers you think you have, Mr. Simmons. Miss Vale is employed here of her own free will. She owes you nothing." Simmons, a portly man with a florid face and expensive clothes that couldn't disguise his coarse nature, spotted Dinah and pointed triumphantly. "There she is. Dinah, tell this cowboy the truth. You signed a contract for a year's service and ran off after 3 months. That's theft of wages, that is." Jackson turned, his expression softening when he saw her. "Dinah, you don't have to speak to him." But she knew this confrontation had been inevitable from the moment she fled Silver Creek. Stepping onto the porch, she faced her tormentor with a courage born of newfound security. "I signed no such contract, Mr. Simmons, as you well know. Our arrangement was month to month, and I left because you—" Her voice faltered briefly. "Because you made it impossible for me to stay." Simmons's face darkened with rage. "You lying little—" "Careful," Jackson interrupted, his hand moving to the gun at his hip. "Choose your next words with extreme care, sir." The warning was clear, and even Simmons wasn't fool enough to ignore it. He glared at Dinah, then at Jackson. "Fine. Keep the girl. But this isn't over, Vance. No one steals from Harold Simmons without consequences." As he turned to leave, Jackson called after him, "Miss Vale is under my protection now. If you or anyone associated with you sets foot on Double V land again, you'll answer to me, and Mr. Simmons." He waited until the man looked back. "I always keep my promises." The threat was delivered with such calm certainty that even Dinah shivered. Simmons and his men rode off, dust billowing behind them as they galloped away from the ranch. When they were gone, Jackson turned to Dinah, concern etching his features. "Are you all right?" She nodded, though her legs felt weak with relief. "How did he find me?" "Small towns have long memories and loose tongues," Jackson said grimly. "Someone probably mentioned the new schoolteacher at the Double V, and Simmons put the pieces together." He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "He won't bother you again, Dinah, I promise." In that moment, looking into Jackson's resolute eyes, Dinah made her decision. "Ask me again," she said softly. He blinked, confused. "Ask you what?" "What you asked yesterday. By the stream." Understanding dawned, followed by a cautious hope. "Are you sure? I said you could have all the time you needed." "I'm sure," Dinah replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Life is too uncertain to waste time when you know what you want." Jackson took her hands in his, oblivious to the ranch hands watching curiously from a distance. "Dinah Vale, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will." The joy that transformed his face was answer enough to any doubts she might have harbored. He lifted her off her feet in an exuberant embrace, spinning her around as laughter bubbled from her throat. When he set her down, he kissed her there in the ranch yard, in full view of everyone. Cheers erupted from the watching hands, and Mrs. Abernathy appeared at the door, wiping happy tears with her apron. "Well, it's about time," the housekeeper declared. "I was beginning to think I'd have to lock you two in the root cellar to get any action." Jackson laughed, keeping an arm around Dinah's waist. "Now, Mrs. Abernathy, some things can't be rushed." "Poppycock," the older woman retorted good-naturedly. "You've been mooning over Miss Vale since the day you brought her home. Anyone with eyes could see it." Dinah blushed, but couldn't deny the truth of the statement. In retrospect, perhaps their path had been inevitable from that first meeting on the storm-swept prairie. News of their engagement spread rapidly through the ranch community. That evening, families gathered at the main house for an impromptu celebration. Sarah Miller hugged Dinah fiercely, whispering, "I told you he was waiting for the right woman." Jackson proposed a toast, his voice carrying over the assembled crowd. "To Dinah Vale, who came to us with nothing but courage and determination, and who has enriched all our lives with her presence. I am the luckiest of men." As glasses were raised and congratulations offered, Dinah caught sight of her suitcase, still tucked in a corner of her room visible through an open door. The battered leather that had once contained all her worldly possessions now seemed like an artifact from another life, a reminder of how far she had come, and how much she had gained. Jackson followed her gaze and leaned down to murmur in her ear, "Still glad you didn't leave that behind when I suggested it." Dinah smiled up at him, heart full. "It brought me to you, didn't it? I'd say that makes it the most valuable thing I've ever owned." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Second most valuable, your heart is what I treasure above all else." The wedding was set for Christmas Day, giving them just over 2 months to prepare. The entire ranch became involved in the planning, with Sarah Miller and other women helping Dinah create a wedding dress from fine fabric ordered from Denver. Jackson insisted on rebuilding the cabin by the stream, working alongside his men whenever he could be spared from ranch duties. School continued, with Dinah's students perhaps the most excited of all about their teacher's upcoming nuptials. They presented her with a handmade quilt, each child having contributed a square with their name embroidered on it. "So you and Mr. Vance will always be warm," explained 12-year-old Ellen Miller solemnly. As the wedding day approached, Dinah experienced moments of disbelief that such happiness could be hers. One evening, finding Jackson poring over ledgers in his study, she voiced her fears. "Sometimes I worry this is all a dream," she admitted, "that I'll wake up back in Silver Creek or worse." Jackson set aside his work and drew her onto his lap, a liberty they allowed themselves now as an engaged couple. "This is real, Dinah. You and me, this ranch, our future together, all of it is real and lasting." She rested her head against his shoulder, breathing in the scent of him, leather, soap, and the indefinable essence that was uniquely Jackson. "I never expected to find this kind of happiness. After my parents died, I learned not to hope for too much. Hope is the one thing we must never surrender," he said, stroking her hair. "Without it, what's the point of any of this?" His wisdom, as always, steadied her. In Jackson, Dinah had found not just a protector or provider, but a true partner who challenged and supported her in equal measure. Christmas Day dawned clear and cold, with fresh snow blanketing the ranch in pristine white. Dinah stood at her window, watching the sun rise over the mountains, turning the landscape into a glittering wonderland. Mrs. Abernathy bustled in with hot chocolate and excitement. "Today's the day, my dear. Let's get you ready to become Mrs. Vance." The wedding was held in the ranch's main hall, which had been transformed with evergreen boughs, red ribbons, and dozens of candles. Every family on the Double V attended, along with ranchers from neighboring properties, and even a few townspeople from Riverton who had come to know the couple. Dinah wore a dress of ivory silk, simple but elegant, with a lace collar that had belonged to Jackson's mother. Sarah Miller had arranged Dinah's hair with sprigs of holly, and her cheeks were flushed with happiness and the heat from the roaring fire. Jackson waited at the front of the room, handsome in a new black suit, his eyes never leaving Dinah as she walked toward him on Frank's arm, the foreman having offered to give her away in the absence of any family. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, with the circuit-riding preacher speaking eloquently about love, partnership, and building a life together. When it came time for vows, Jackson took Dinah's hands in his voice strong and clear. "Dinah Vale, I take you as my wife with joy and gratitude. I promise to cherish and respect you, to support your dreams as you have supported mine, and to build with you a home filled with love, learning, and laughter. All that I have is yours from this day forward, for as long as we both shall live." Tears blurred Dinah's vision as she responded, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "Jackson Vance, I take you as my husband, thankful for the chance meeting that brought us together and the kindness that made you stop for a stranger in need. I promise to stand by you in all seasons, to share your joys and sorrows, and to create with you a life richer than either of us could build alone. My heart is yours from this day forward, for as long as we both shall live. By the authority vested in me, the preacher concluded, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. Jackson didn't hesitate, drawing Dinah into an embrace that sealed their union and promised a lifetime of devotion. The room erupted in cheers and applause, the celebration beginning in earnest as the newlyweds turned to face their community as Mr. and Mrs. Vance. The cabin by the stream was finished just in time for their wedding night, a cozy two-room structure with a stone fireplace, comfortable furnishings, and windows that faced the mountains. Jackson carried Dinah across the threshold as tradition demanded, setting her gently on her feet in what would be their private sanctuary away from the bustle of the main house. "Welcome home, Mrs. Vance," he said, kissing her again with a passion that left no doubt about his feelings. Later, as they lay entwined before the fire, Dinah traced the contours of her husband's face with gentle fingers. "I never thanked you properly," she murmured. "For what?" Jackson asked, capturing her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "For stopping that day on the prairie. For seeing something in me worth saving." He smiled, pulling her closer. "I should be thanking you. You brought light back into my life when I didn't even realize how dark it had become." Outside, snow began to fall again, blanketing their new home in hushed silence. Inside, wrapped in each other's arms, Dinah and Jackson planned their future: more children for the school, expansion of the ranch, perhaps even a trip east someday to show Dinah the cities she had only read about. "But first," Jackson said, his eyes twinkling with mischief, "we need to do something about that suitcase of yours." Dinah laughed, remembering how she had clung to it that first day. "What did you have in mind?" "I thought we might frame that copy of Jane Eyre and hang it here where we can both enjoy it, and the photograph of your parents should have a place of honor on the mantel." He kissed her forehead tenderly. "The rags, though, might need to go." "You have a husband now who intends to keep his promise." "What promise is that?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Jackson smiled, echoing the words he had spoken on that fateful day when their paths first crossed. "Leave that, I'll give you all you need." And as the snow fell softly outside their window, and the fire cast golden light across their entwined figures, Dinah knew with absolute certainty that he already had. Spring came early to the Wyoming Territory in 1879, bringing with it new growth and possibilities. The Double V Ranch flourished under Jackson's careful management, the cattle fat and healthy after a mild winter. The school, now in its second term, had grown to include 17 children, necessitating an addition to the building that Jackson had constructed over the winter months. Dinah, now 5 months pregnant with their first child, continued teaching, though she had begun training Ellen Miller as her assistant in preparation for the time when motherhood would claim more of her attention. The girl, now 13, showed a natural aptitude for teaching and reveled in the responsibility. On a warm May afternoon, as Dinah was dismissing her students for the day, she noticed a familiar figure approaching on horseback. Her heart leapt, as it always did at the sight of her husband, even after nearly 6 months of marriage. Jackson dismounted with his usual grace and waited until the last child had departed before entering the schoolhouse. "How are my 2 favorite people today?" he asked, placing a gentle hand on Dinah's rounded belly. "Active," she replied with a laugh as the baby kicked in response to its father's voice. "I think we have a future rancher on our hands, or teacher," Jackson countered, drawing her into a careful embrace. "Either way, this child will have the best of both of us." They walked hand in hand back to their cabin, which had been expanded over the winter to include a nursery. The interior was warm and welcoming, filled with books, comfortable furniture, and mementos of their still new life together. As they settled onto the porch swing that Jackson had built as a Christmas gift, Dinah rested her head on his shoulder, content in a way she had never imagined possible. "I had a letter from Denver today," Jackson said after a comfortable silence. The governor is establishing a territorial education board and wants recommendations for members. I put your name forward." Dinah straightened in surprise. "Jackson, I'm hardly qualified for such a position." "On the contrary," he argued, "you're exactly what they need. Someone who understands the challenges of frontier education, but maintains high standards." The success of the Double V School is becoming known throughout the territory. Pride warmed her at his words. The school had indeed become something special, with students progressing far beyond what might be expected in such a remote location. Several of the older children were already reading at levels that would impress city schools. "I'll consider it," she promised, though the idea of influencing education policy across the territory was both exhilarating and intimidating. "After the baby comes, perhaps." Jackson nodded, his hand finding hers. "No rush. The important thing is that you keep dreaming, Dinah. Keep stretching for what might seem impossible." The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. In the distance, the sounds of the ranch settling for the evening created a soothing backdrop to their conversation. "I was thinking about names for the baby," Dinah said, changing the subject. "If it's a boy, perhaps Charles, after my father." "Charles Vance," Jackson tested the name. "It has a good, strong sound, and if it's a girl, Caroline," Dinah said softly, "after your first wife." "I would like to honor her memory if you're comfortable with that." Jackson's arms tightened around her, and she felt the dampness of tears against her hair. "I would be honored," he whispered. "Thank you for understanding that she will always be part of my past, even as you are my present and future." "Love doesn't diminish when it's shared," Dinah replied, wisdom born of her own experience. "It grows." As darkness fell and the first stars appeared overhead, they remained on the porch, planning and dreaming. Jackson spoke of expanding the ranch, perhaps adding sheep to diversify their income. Dinah shared her vision for the school, including advanced classes for those students who showed particular promise. "We should establish a scholarship," Jackson suggested, "for students who wish to continue their education beyond what we can offer here. Perhaps send one promising student each year for college." The idea was exactly the sort of forward-thinking generosity that had first drawn Dinah to her husband. "That would change lives," she agreed. "Give opportunities to children who might otherwise never leave the territory." "Like a certain school teacher I know," Jackson teased, "who has never seen the ocean or visited New York." "Someday," Dinah promised, "when the baby is older and the school firmly established." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Frank, Jackson's foreman, riding hard toward their cabin. Both tensed, recognizing the urgency in his approach. "Mr. Vance," Frank called as he reined in his horse. "Riders coming, looks like Simmons and some hired guns." Just past the north boundary marker, Jackson was on his feet instantly, all trace of relaxation gone. "How many?" "6, maybe 7, Frank reported grimly. "Armed and riding like they mean business." "Get the women and children to the main house," Jackson ordered. "Have the men ready, but no one fires unless I give the word." He turned to Dinah, his expression torn between concern and determination. "You should go to the main house too." "I'm staying with you," she replied firmly, rising to stand beside him. "This is my home, and I won't be driven from it by Harold Simmons or anyone else." Pride flashed in Jackson's eyes, though worry remained. "At least stay inside then. Please, Dinah, for the baby's sake." She nodded reluctantly, recognizing the sense in his request. "Be careful, Jackson. Simmons is not a reasonable man. Neither am I when someone threatens what's mine." He kissed her quickly, then strode to the gun cabinet, removing his rifle and checking that it was loaded. From the window, Dinah watched as Jackson and Frank positioned themselves in front of the cabin, other ranch hands arriving to form a protective line. In the distance, dust rose from approaching horses, and her heart raced with fear not for herself, but for her husband and the life they had built together. Harold Simmons and his men reined in about 50 yards from the cabin, facing the wall of determined ranchers. Even from a distance, Dinah could see the cruel smile on her former employer's face. "Vance," Simmons called, his voice carrying clearly in the evening air. "I've come to settle our business." "We have no business, Simmons," Jackson replied coolly. "I warned you what would happen if you set foot on Double V land again." Simmons laughed, an ugly sound. "You're outnumbered, Cowboy, and I've got the law on my side this time." He gestured to a man beside him who wore a tarnished badge. "Sheriff Wilkins here has a warrant for the arrest of Dinah Vale on charges of theft." "That's Mrs. Vance now," Jackson corrected, his rifle steady in his hands. "And any charges against my wife are fabricated, as you well know." The so-called sheriff, whom Dinah had never seen before and suspected was no lawman at all, spat tobacco juice onto the ground. "Warrant says theft of property valued at $50. Either hand over the woman or pay the fine." It was an extortion attempt, pure and simple. Dinah's hands clenched into fists as she watched through the window, anger replacing fear. This was about Simmons's wounded pride, not any actual theft. To her surprise, Jackson lowered his rifle slightly. $50, you say, plus expenses for coming all this way," Simmons added smugly. "Call it an even 100. Jackson turned to Frank, saying something Dinah couldn't hear. The foreman nodded and jogged toward the main house. Moments later, he returned with a small pouch. $100 in gold, Jackson announced, holding up the pouch. "For a worthless piece of paper signed by a corrupt sheriff from a town I've never heard of." Simmons's smile widened. "Smart man, throw it over." "Not so fast," Jackson countered. "I want the warrant first, and a signed statement that all claims against Dinah Vance are settled in full." After some grumbling and negotiation, papers were exchanged for gold, with Frank acting as intermediary. Dinah watched in disbelief as Simmons pocketed the money, clearly pleased with himself. "Pleasure doing business with you, Vance," he called mockingly. "Give my regards to the little thief." Jackson's voice was cold as steel. "The business is concluded, Simmons. Now get off my land and never return. Next time, I won't be buying papers, I'll be burying trespassers." The threat hung in the air, its seriousness unmistakable. Even Simmons seemed to recognize that he had pushed as far as was safe. With a final sneer, he wheeled his horse around, his men following as they galloped away from the Double V. Only when they were out of sight did Dinah rush outside, tears of relief and frustration streaming down her face. "Jackson, you shouldn't have paid him. It was extortion." Jackson gathered her into his arms, his heart pounding against her cheek. $100 is a small price to put this behind us permanently," he said quietly. "The important thing is that you and the baby are safe." "But he got away with it," she protested. "He'll just try again with someone else." "Perhaps," Jackson acknowledged, "but not here, not with us." He looked down at her, his expression serious. "Dinah, I would pay any price to keep you safe. Money can be replaced, you cannot." The depth of his love, expressed so simply and directly, silenced her protests. Standing there in the gathering darkness, surrounded by the men who had been prepared to defend her, Dinah felt a surge of gratitude for this life she had never expected to find. Later that night, after the excitement had died down and they were alone in their cabin, Dinah sat at her desk, opening the journal Jackson had given her months before. Its pages were now half filled with her neat handwriting records of the school's progress, observations about ranch life, and personal reflections on her journey from desperate fugitive to beloved wife. Tonight, she wrote about courage, not the showy bravado of men with guns, but the quieter courage of building a life day by day, of loving despite past hurts, of believing in a future when experience argued against hope. Jackson, reading in bed, looked up as she closed the journal. "What profound thoughts did you capture tonight, Mrs. Vance?" Dinah smiled, joining him under the quilt her students had made. "Just that life is strange and wonderful, and that sometimes the worst moments lead to the best outcomes. Like being stranded in a storm with nothing but a suitcase of rags," he teased, drawing her close. "Exactly like that." She nestled against him, the baby moving between them as if agreeing. I was so determined not to leave those few possessions behind, and now look at all I have. Jackson's hand caressed her belly, his touch reverent. What you have, my love, you've earned through your own courage and determination. I may have offered shelter from the storm, but you built this life with me, step by step. The simple truth of his words warmed her more than any fire could. Together, they had created something neither could have managed alone: a home, a school, a community, and soon, a family bound by choice rather than circumstance. "I love you, Jackson Vance," Dinah whispered, the words still new enough to thrill her each time she spoke them. "And I love you, Dinah Vance," he replied, kissing her with a tenderness that belied the strength she had witnessed earlier. "More than I ever thought possible." As they drifted towards sleep, Dinah reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. From orphan child to desperate woman fleeing with nothing but rags, to respected teacher and beloved wife, each step had seemed impossible until it was taken. Outside, the Wyoming night spread star-spangled across the Double V Ranch. Inside, wrapped in the arms of the man who had seen her worth when she herself had forgotten it, Dinah Vance dreamed of a future as vast and promising as the western sky. Caroline Elizabeth Vance was born on a perfect September morning in 1879, her lusty cries announcing her arrival to a world eager to receive her. She had her mother's deep brown eyes and her father's determined chin, a combination that both parents agreed was entirely fitting. "She's perfect," Jackson whispered, cradling his daughter with a gentleness that brought tears to Dinah's eyes. "Absolutely perfect." The ranch celebrated the birth with a day of rest and feasting, families gathering to welcome the newest member of the Double V community. Students brought handmade gifts for their teachers: baby tiny moccasins from the Miller children, a carved wooden rattle from Frank's son, a miniature quilt pieced by the older girls under Sarah's guidance. Life adjusted to accommodate the new arrival. Ellen Miller took over more teaching responsibilities, proving herself a natural educator. Jackson rearranged his schedule to spend more time at home, often working with Caroline sleeping peacefully against his chest in a sling Dinah had fashioned. By the time Caroline was 6 months old, Dinah had established a routine that allowed her to balance motherhood with her passion for teaching. 3 days a week, she taught at the school with Ellen assisting. The other days, she focused on Caroline and on her new role as a member of the Territorial Education Board, a position she had accepted after all, at Jackson's encouragement. "Your voice is needed, Dinah," he had insisted. "There are children all across the territory who deserve the same opportunities our students have." And so once a month, Jackson would care for Caroline while Dinah traveled to Cheyenne for board meetings, returning full of ideas and renewed purpose. It was an unconventional arrangement for 1880, but the Double V had never been bound by convention. On Caroline's first birthday, as family and friends gathered to celebrate, Dinah found herself standing beside the window of their now expanded cabin, watching Jackson show their daughter to the assembled guests. Pride swelled within her at the sight of her husband, still as handsome as the day they met, but softer somehow, transformed by fatherhood in ways neither had anticipated. Sarah Miller joined her at the window, following her gaze. "That man adores both of you," she observed with a smile. "Never seen anything like it." "I'm very fortunate," Dinah agreed. "Fortunate, yes," Sarah nodded. "But you've also worked hard for this happiness. We all have." She gestured to the thriving community visible through the window: the school, the ranch buildings, the homes of workers who had become family. "When John and I came here, this was barely more than a dream in Jackson's mind. Now look at it." Dinah did look, seeing with fresh eyes what they had all built together over the past 3 years. The Double V was no longer just a cattle ranch, but a true community with a school that was becoming known throughout the territory, a small chapel built the previous year, even a store that saved families the long journey to Riverton for supplies. "We're sending our first scholarship student east next fall," Dinah said proudly. "Thomas Green. Jackson's arranged for him to attend a preparatory school in Boston, then hopefully Yale." "That boy has a fine mind," Sarah agreed. "Reminds me of you, actually, same hunger for knowledge." The comparison pleased Dinah. Thomas was the son of one of the ranch hands, a quiet boy who had devoured every book in the school and then started on Jackson's personal library. His talent for mathematics and science had become apparent early, and the scholarship Jackson had established would give him opportunities unimaginable to most frontier children. "Speaking of hunger," Sarah continued with a laugh, "I'd better help Mrs. Abernathy with the birthday cake before she has my hide." Left alone, Dinah continued to watch through the window as Jackson lifted Caroline high in the air, eliciting delighted giggles from their daughter and applause from the watching crowd. His joy was unrestrained, a man who had found his purpose in family and community. That evening, after the guests had departed and Caroline was sleeping peacefully in her crib, Jackson and Dinah sat on their porch swing, watching the stars emerge over the mountains. "Happy?" Jackson asked, his arm warm around her shoulders. "Completely," Dinah replied, leaning into his embrace. "I was thinking today about that first meeting, me staggering across the prairie, you offering shelter from the storm." "Best decision I ever made," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Though you were mighty suspicious of my intentions, as I recall," Dinah laughed softly. "Can you blame me? Strange man on horseback, offering to take me home. Most women in my position would have been wary." "Most women in your position wouldn't have had the courage to keep going," Jackson countered. "That's what drew me to you from the start, Dinah, your determination to survive, to carve out a life on your own terms." "I wasn't doing a very good job of it when you found me," she reminded him. "You were doing the best you could with what you had," he corrected gently, "just like all of us." The simple wisdom of his words settled over her like a blessing. They had both come to this place with wounds and losses, but together, they had built something stronger than either could have created alone. Inside the cabin, Caroline made a small sound in her sleep. Both parents tensed, ready to respond, but the baby settled again without waking. "I want another," Jackson said suddenly. "Another child, when you're ready." Dinah smiled, having had the same thought herself recently. "I'd like that. Caroline should have siblings." "A house full of children," he mused, the longing clear in his voice. "All with your intelligence and my good looks." She elbowed him playfully. "Conceited man. Perhaps they'll have my looks and your stubbornness." "Even better," he agreed, catching her hand and kissing her palm in that way that still made her heart race after nearly 2 years of marriage. "As long as they're ours." The simple possessive word ours contained worlds of meaning. Their children, their home, their life together. All things Dinah had never dared hope for when she fled Silver Creek with nothing but a suitcase of meager possessions. "Do you ever wonder what might have happened if you hadn't stopped that day?" she asked. "If you had ridden past instead of offering help," Jackson considered the question seriously. "I couldn't have ridden past," he said finally. "Not once I saw you. There was something about the way you held yourself, even exhausted and afraid, a dignity that demanded respect." He smiled, remembering. "And then there was that suitcase you refused to abandon even when I offered to give you everything you needed." "I still have it," Dinah admitted. "The suitcase? It's in the attic now, empty of the rags but still holding my parents' photograph and my mother's book." "As it should be," Jackson nodded. "Reminders of where we came from help us appreciate where we are." They fell silent, contemplating the journey that had brought them to this peaceful moment on their porch, with their daughter sleeping safely inside and the vast Wyoming sky spread above them like a promise. "I have something for you," Jackson said after a while, reaching into his pocket. "Was going to save it for Christmas, but tonight seems right." He handed her a small package wrapped in plain brown paper. Curious, Dinah unwrapped it to find a delicate gold locket on a fine chain. "Open it," he urged. Inside were 2 tiny portraits, one of Jackson and one of Caroline. their similar expressions of determined joy making Dinah's heart swell with love. "It's beautiful," she whispered, tracing the engravings on the outer surface with her fingertip. "Perfect." Jackson fastened the chain around her neck, his fingers warm against her skin. "So you'll always have us close to your heart, even when you're away at those education board meetings." The thoughtfulness of the gift moved her deeply. "I love you, Jackson Vance," she said, turning to face him. "More than I have words to express." "Show me," he suggested, his voice dropping to that intimate tone that still sent shivers down her spine. Later, in the privacy of their bedroom, with moonlight spilling across the quilt and the sound of the wind in the cottonwoods outside their window, they reaffirmed the connection that had grown stronger with each passing day. Their bodies spoke what words could not: of gratitude for second chances, of passion undimmed by familiarity, of a love built on mutual respect and shared dreams. Afterward, as Jackson slept beside her, Dinah touched the locket at her throat and offered a silent prayer of thanksgiving. For the storm that had driven her across Jackson's path, for his compassion that day and every day since, for the community they had built together and the family they were creating. And yes, even for that battered suitcase of rags that had seemed so precious when it was all she had, a reminder that sometimes in losing everything, we create space for something far more valuable to take its place. Outside, a shooting star streaked across the Wyoming sky, a fleeting moment of brilliance against the endless dark. Inside, Dinah Vance closed her eyes and slept, secure in the knowledge that her own light would continue, burning steady and strong in the lives of her husband, her daughter, her students, and all who would come after. From such humble beginnings, a desperate woman fleeing with nothing but determination and a suitcase of rags, a lonely rancher offering shelter from both literal and figurative storms, had grown a legacy of love, learning, and possibility that would echo through generations to come. And it all began with 8 simple words spoken on a dust-blown prairie: "Leave that. I'll give you all you need."